In the winter of 2026, a homeless former hedge fund analyst named Marcus Teller discovered a mathematical flaw in the U.S. Treasury's payment system, a flaw that would allow him to steal $47 billion in 72 hours without a single line of code being detected. But he didn't want the money. He wanted revenge on the men who destroyed his father. Marcus Teller had not always been a ghost. 3 years earlier, he had been the youngest quantitative analyst at Brevin Howard's New York office, a prodigy who could spot arbitrage opportunities in his sleep. But after his father, a small business owner from Queens who had been defrauded by a predatory lender called Veritas Capital Partners, committed suicide, Marcus lost everything: his job, his fiancée, his reputation, and finally his home. He spent 18 months living in a 24-hour laundromat in the Bronx, surviving on expired granola bars and stolen Wi-Fi, all while secretly reverse engineering the very financial system that had betrayed him. It was there, on a cracked laptop with a missing H key, that he stumbled upon the anomaly: a zero-day vulnerability in the automated clearinghouse system that allowed for a settlement float reversal, a tiny temporal loophole where money could be requested, authorized, and then canceled after settlement but before reconciliation. In layman's terms, he could print money directly from the Federal Reserve's internal ledger, and the only way to stop him would be to shut down the entire U.S. payments infrastructure for a full business day, something no president or Fed chair would ever dare to do because it would trigger a global depression. Marcus, however, did not want to become a billionaire. He wanted to destroy Veritas Capital Partners, the $90 billion private equity firm run by a silver-haired sociopath named Harrison Drake, the man who had systematically looted his father's trucking business through a series of hidden fees, balloon interest rates, and a forced default clause that transferred ownership of the family's warehouse to a Drake-owned shell company in Delaware. The story begins at 4:17 a.m. on a freezing Tuesday, when Marcus broke into the abandoned sub-basement of 40 Wall Street, a forgotten relay station for the New York Fed's backup fiber lines, and plugged his custom-built Raspberry Pi cluster directly into the backbone of American finance. His hands were shaking, not from fear, but from the cold, because he had not eaten in 31 hours. He typed a single command: "Execute Project Phoenix." On his screen, a green progress bar appeared: 1%, 2%, 3%. By the time it reached 100%, exactly $47 million would be moved from dormant Treasury accounts into a cascade of 6,000 untraceable burner wallets, not crypto wallets, but prepaid debit accounts registered to deceased individuals from the Social Security Death Master File. He did not plan to keep a single cent. Instead, he would use the money as a battering ram. He would buy up every single piece of Veritas Capital's publicly traded debt, trigger cross-default covenants on their leveraged loans, and force a liquidity crisis so severe that Harrison Drake would have no choice but to sell off his entire portfolio at fire sale prices, which would then trigger a margin call on Drake's personal $2 billion line of credit, which was collateralized by Veritas stock, a domino chain that Marcus had simulated exactly 1,247 times on his laundromat laptop. At 4:32 a.m., the progress bar hit 12%. That was when the first complication arrived: a text message from an unknown number that read, "Nice try, but I already own that exploit. Meet me at the Old Ebbitt Grill, 6 a.m. Come alone or I trigger the kill switch." The message was signed with a single initial: C. Marcus knew immediately who C was: Celeste Zhang, a former NSA crypto analyst who had been fired for whistleblowing on a surveillance program and had since become the most feared independent financial mercenary on the dark web. She was known for two things: never losing a trade and never betraying a client, but she also never worked for free. Marcus had exactly 93 minutes to decide: trust her, kill the operation, or find a third option. He chose the third option. He reprogrammed the exploit to divert 5% of the float into a dead-drop wallet that only Celeste could access, essentially a $2.35 million bribe, and then he walked into the Old Ebbitt Grill at 5:58 a.m., wearing a stained hoodie and carrying nothing but a USB drive shaped like a skeleton key. Celeste was already there, sitting in the back booth, sipping black coffee from a chipped mug. She was younger than he expected, maybe 32, with sharp cheekbones and the kind of calm that only came from having stared down death at least twice. She slid a manila folder across the table. Inside were photographs of Harrison Drake meeting with a Russian oligarch named Dmitry Volkov at a private airstrip in Teterboro, New Jersey, just 3 days after Marcus's father had died. The timestamp on the photos was undeniable. Drake had flown to Moscow the same night, and within 2 weeks, a mysterious $500 million wire had appeared in a Cayman account linked to a Volkov front company. Marcus's stomach turned. This was not just fraud, this was money laundering, possibly even treason if the funds were tied to sanctions evasion. Celeste spoke for the first time. Your father didn't just lose his business, he found something he wasn't supposed to see, a ledger, a paper ledger that Drake kept in a safe in his Southampton mansion. Your father was a trucker. He delivered a shipment of antique furniture to Drake's estate 3 days before the loan documents were signed. He must have seen the safe left open. He must have seen the names, the accounts, the real numbers. Marcus's throat tightened. What names? Celeste leaned forward. Every senator on the banking committee, 2 Supreme Court justices, and a sitting vice president. Drake doesn't just run a private equity firm. He runs a clearinghouse for political bribes disguised as carried interest. The Russian money is just the tip. The real poison is in the domestic side. Your father didn't just lose his business. He killed himself because he knew that if he talked, you would be killed too. For the first time in 18 months, Marcus felt something other than cold rage. He felt purpose. He looked at Celeste and said, "How much to burn it all down?" She smiled, but it was not a warm smile.
But it was not a warm smile. It was the smile of a predator who had finally found the perfect trap. "I don't want money, Marcus. I want a position. When this is over, if we survive, you're going to build a new kind of financial exchange, transparent, decentralized, unbreakable. And I want to be your head of security. That's my price." Marcus extended his hand. She shook it. At 7:22 a.m., they left the restaurant and walked to a nearby parking garage where Celeste had stashed a modified cargo van filled with servers, antennas, and a Starlink terminal. Inside, Marcus launched Phase 2 of Project Phoenix, the public exposure. He used the stolen Treasury float to purchase a full-page ad in the Wall Street Journal, not a corporate ad, but a plain text announcement that would run the next morning, headlined, "I stole $47 million from the Fed. Here's why." The body of the ad contained a cryptographic proof of the exploit, a link to a live document dump, and a single promise. If Harrison Drake did not resign from Veritas Capital by noon the following day, Marcus would release the full list of political clients and their transaction histories. At 8:05 a.m., his phone exploded, not with calls, with alerts. Every major news outlet had picked up the story. Bloomberg's terminal flashed a red headline. Unidentified hacker claims Fed breach. Treasury confirms irregularities. Within 15 minutes, the Dow Jones futures dropped 800 points. Within an hour, the White House press secretary held an emergency briefing stating that the president had been informed and that all necessary measures were being taken. But Marcus knew the truth. There were no necessary measures. The only fix required a 3-day shutdown of the ACH system, which would stop payroll for 120 million Americans, halt Social Security deposits, and freeze every mortgage and credit card payment in the country. No politician would survive that. Drake, however, was not a politician. He was a predator. At 9:17 a.m., Marcus's van was struck by a black SUV. The impact threw him against the server rack, shattering 2 ribs and dislocating his left shoulder. Celeste, who had been monitoring the perimeter, managed to drag him out through a side hatch, just as 2 men in FBI windbreakers, but carrying Russian-made pistols, approached the wreckage. They were not real FBI, they were Volkov's men. Celeste fired 3 shots, disabling one assailant, then pulled Marcus into a waiting taxi driven by one of her contacts, a former Marine named Omar, who drove a hybrid Camry with bullet-resistant glass. As they sped toward the Brooklyn Navy Yard, Marcus struggled to breathe, but he forced himself to type a second command into his laptop: "Trigger dead man switch." This was his ultimate insurance policy. If his vital signs flatlined for more than 60 seconds, every single document, every ledger, every photograph, every wire transfer would be published automatically to 1,000 torrent trackers, 500 newsrooms, and every sitting member of Congress. Drake could kill him, but he could not kill the truth. At 10:04 a.m., they arrived at a repurposed warehouse that Celeste used as a safe house. Inside, a doctor, another of her contacts, set Marcus's shoulder and taped his ribs, while Marcus watched the news on a wall of monitors. The situation had escalated beyond anyone's control. The Treasury Secretary had called for an emergency weekend session of the G20. The SEC had halted trading in all Veritas-linked securities, and Harrison Drake had just appeared on CNBC, live from his Southampton state, looking tanned and unbothered, dismissing the allegations as the delusions of a mentally unstable individual. But Marcus noticed something that no one else did. Drake's left hand was trembling. Just slightly, just once, when the anchor asked about the Russian oligarch. That tiny tremor told Marcus everything he needed to know. Drake was scared. Not of prison. Drake had lawyers who could delay any trial for a decade. He was scared of something else. The names, the ledger, the safe. Because the safe did not just contain political bribes, it contained the original, handwritten partnership agreement between Drake, Volkov, and 3 other men, one of whom was now the chairman of the Federal Reserve. Marcus had not known that last part until that very moment, but as he replayed the interview, he saw the Fed chairman's name on a memo that flashed briefly behind Drake's shoulder. He paused the feed, zoomed in, and felt his blood cold. The memo was dated 3 weeks before his father's death. It referenced Project Nightingale, a plan to engineer a controlled collapse of the regional banking system in order to force a merger that would consolidate 40% of all small business lending under a single entity, Veritas Capital. Marcus's father had not just stumbled on a bribery scheme, he had stumbled on a conspiracy to destroy the American middle class, and he paid for that knowledge with his life. At 11:30 a.m., Marcus made a decision that would change everything. He called the only journalist he trusted, Nina Okonkwo, an investigative reporter for ProPublica, who won a Pulitzer for exposing predatory lending. He gave her a 1-hour exclusive with proof on the condition that she would not publish until he gave the signal. Nina agreed after he sent her a single document, a signed confession from a former Veritas vice president who had been living under witness protection in Phoenix. The confession detailed everything: the fake loan terms, the hidden fees, the forced defaults, and the murder of at least 2 other business owners who had tried to fight back. Nina's voice cracked as she read it. "Marcus, do you understand what you're holding? This isn't just a story. This is the biggest financial crime since Madoff, maybe bigger." "I know. That's why I need you to wait. If you publish now, Drake will go underground. His assets will be frozen, but he'll still have the offshore accounts, the Russian money. He'll disappear. I need to hit him where he can't run, his ego." Nina paused. "What are you going to do?" Marcus looked at the progress bar on his laptop. It had reached 89%. The $47 million was now completely distributed across the burner accounts. He had not spent a penny of it on himself. Instead, he had used it to buy up every single distressed small business loan that Veritas had issued, over 8,000 loans, and forgiven them. not through a bank, not through a court, through a smart contract on a private blockchain that he had coded himself. The moment the funds settled, every one of those borrowers received an automated notification. Your debt to Veritas Capital has been extinguished. No further payment is required. This is not a scam. You owe nothing. By noon, the notifications went viral on social media. Borrowers posted screenshots, videos of themselves crying, dancing, hugging their children. The hashtag #VeritasForgiven trended
Drake's
number one
own employees
worldwide.
started calling in sick. His chief compliance officer resigned live on Twitter. And then, at 12:07 p.m., Marcus did the unthinkable. He released the first batch of documents. Not the full ledger, but a single spreadsheet showing Veritas's internal profitability score for each borrower, ranked by race, zip code, and education level. The company had explicitly targeted Black and Latino small business owners in majority-minority neighborhoods using algorithms designed to push them into default. The spreadsheet included a column labeled Ease of Foreclosure, with rankings from 1 to 5. Marcus's father had been a 5, the easiest target. The world exploded. Within 30 minutes, the Attorney General announced a criminal investigation. Within an hour, the New York State Legislature opened impeachment proceedings against the Fed chairman, who had already submitted a letter of resignation citing health reasons. And Harrison Drake, for the first time in his life, made a mistake. He went on live television again, but this time he was not tanned and relaxed. He was red-faced, sweating, screaming at the anchor to shut up and stop asking fake questions. He called Marcus a terrorist and a thief. He demanded that the FBI hunt him down and shoot him like the animal he is. It was the rant of a man who had lost control. And Marcus knew that was the moment to strike. He gave Nina the signal. At 1:15 p.m., ProPublica published the full story, including the witness protection confession, the Russian wire transfers, the political bribery ledger, and, most damning of all, a recording of a phone call between Drake and the Fed chairman, obtained by Celeste's contacts, in which they discussed letting the small banks fail to clean out the weak hands. The recording ended with Drake saying, "The little people don't matter. They never did." By 2 p.m., Harrison Drake was under arrest, not by the FBI, but by the U.S. Marshals, who had been ordered personally by the president to take him into custody at a secret location. By 3 p.m., Veritas Capital filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy, the largest private equity collapse in history. By 5 p.m., Marcus Teller walked out of the Brooklyn warehouse into a crowd of reporters, cameras, and police. He did not run. He did not hide. He walked straight to the nearest NYPD precinct, surrendered himself, and said, "I'm ready to testify." The story did not end there. Over the next 18 months, Marcus Teller became the most unlikely hero in American financial history. He was charged with computer fraud, wire fraud, and theft of government funds, but a jury of 12 ordinary New Yorkers acquitted him on all counts after hearing just 3 days of testimony. The lead prosecutor, a woman named Catherine Hughes, actually cried during her closing argument, not because she lost, but because she had been one of the small business owners whose loan Marcus had forgiven. She had not known until she saw her own name on the list. Marcus did not return to Wall Street. Instead, he took Celeste's offer and built the exchange they had dreamed of, a decentralized, blockchain-based marketplace called Phoenix, where small businesses could borrow directly from ordinary investors at fair rates with no hidden fees, no predatory algorithms, and no bailouts for the rich. Within 5 years, Phoenix had facilitated over $200 billion in loans, created an estimated 1.2 million jobs, and forced every major bank to rewrite its small business lending practices. Marcus's father's warehouse, the one that Drake had stolen, became the first Phoenix Community Center, offering free financial literacy classes, legal aid, and mental health counseling. On the 5th anniversary of his father's death, Marcus hung a plaque on the wall. It read, "In memory of Harold Teller, who saw the truth and refused to look away. This is for all the little people. You matter. You always did." And every night before he went to sleep, Marcus opened his old cracked laptop, the one from the laundromat, and looked at the first line of code he had ever written for Project Phoenix. It was a simple comment, just 3 words, #courage over fear. That, he realized, was the only exploit that had ever really mattered. Not the math, not the money, just a son who refused to let his father's death be for nothing, and a country that for one shining moment decided that justice was worth more than the stock market. The end.